Hi, Lucinda. Happy to see you again. Yes. Um, Maybe as a first quick introduction of you, all your life you've been trying to get youngsters around the world interested in space. First, you did that in the US, where you were born, where you're originally from, and now you're doing it in the UK and you're even doing it in China. How did you actually get interested in space?
Honestly, Carly, when you put it like that, I've never even realized. I think I've just done what I've done because, well, one thing, being an American growing up in California, especially in Silicon Valley, where I was really
Hmm.
lucky to have my father moved us there from Central Valley, California.
Yes.
Um, he had a relative in San Francisco, and that gave him the courage to move us to Silicon Valley, San Jose, back in 1970. So I've been living
Wow.
there since I was born.
That's
And
1 year after the moon landing, right?
that's correct. And
Right.
I was born 9 months after the moon landing.
Oh, wow.
So my father worked for NASA at the time. And so he was very much excited about human space exploration. So in some respects, I think, space has always been a part of my life, even while I was, my mother was carrying me for 9 months. It was part of her life and it was part of my dad's life because yes, the Apollo moon landings were happening while I was, while I was being created in
Hmm.
my mother's body, and my father was very very excited. My mom tells me that he worked at NASA at the time. My father has a background in radar because he worked in the military in the army in the United States, and I guess he tested out enough to work in radar, and eventually got his electrical engineering degree. And so when he came out of the army, he was able to work for places like NASA because he already had a certain type of security clearance, and so
Hmm.
he was perfect for a position there. Um, he did eventually go on and get his degree with the GI Bill and then retired from Lockheed. And Lockheed works pretty closely with NASA as well. So with my father and all the choices he made, um, really made an impression on me, being lucky enough to grow up in a family that was very space minded, to grow up in a country that was very space minded, because it was a part of our education, it was a part of our curriculum. Whenever there was a space launch, a television would be pushed into our classroom at school, and we would watch the space launch together.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
so, so it was, you couldn't escape it if you tried, at least not for me and living in the San Francisco Bay Area in California.
It's just part
Um,
of life, basically, right?
it really was. And I think that's kind of maybe why it is such a big part of who I am today because of all that experience way back to yeah, when I wasn't even born yet, just before 9 months before the moon landings.
Hmm. Wow. And yeah, so later on, you also joined an association in the United States called Mars Society, right? Where you also eventually became the executive director, right?
That's right.
Mm.
Uh, Back in the early 2000s, I had a life-changing moment where I just decided I'm going to leave California, drive 10 hours, and go to a Mars Society conference. So I did, and I went there to do an education. NASA was doing an education event at the Mars Society conference, and I
Mm.
won an award. I won some quiz award, so I won some packet from NASA.
Wow.
And that's really all it took. I had already gotten a geology degree. I'd already finished my undergraduate degrees in both science and art. So my background's in geology and art and design. And I knew I wanted to combine those two skills to continue space advocacy. And I didn't know how. So I think this event at Mars Society kind of helped light that spark, or that's was that extra spark that I needed to kind of get a really well lit fire going under me that pushed me towards doing a some post graduate work in science credentialing in California, which was really, really hard. I think it's one of the most difficult places to get a science credential is in California because the standards are so
Mhm.
high, even
Wow.
compared to other states in the United States. And of course, getting a credential in California easily allowed me to get a credential in the United Kingdom. So
Mhm.
I went from teaching Earth and space science and astronomy in the United States. So let's see, for how long? For about 8 years. And then
Mhm.
somewhere in there, I moved to Scotland to get a graduate degree. And it was when I was in Scotland that Dr. Zubrin called me and asked me to become executive director of the Mars Society in 2009.
Mhm.
And then I
Wow.
went home for a small stint, and then eventually ended up meeting my husband, who's English, and then moving to the UK in 2012. And I worked at NASA while I was in California in the early sorry, from 2010 to 2012, I believe it was.
Mhm. Yeah.
So right after I became
Where at NASA?
at NASA Ames in Building 245 at the Earth and Space Science Laboratory, which I believe is
Mhm.
now renamed as the Astrobiology. Uh, I don't know. I'm not sure the lab. Maybe it's still called a lab, Astrobiology. So they've changed their
Mhm.
name, but it was the Earth and Space Science Laboratory. I worked. Dr. Chris
Mhm.
McKay was my supervisor there,
Wow.
and yeah, it was pretty amazing. I got to partake in four, I think, worldwide expeditions where I spent a month in different countries doing Mars analog research with a team of scientists. And we'd bring in teachers into the field because
Mhm.
that was the whole purpose of this program called Spaceward Bound.
Maybe could you explain quickly what is Mars analog?
Mars analog. So it's simulating a Mars-like environment or living or working on Earth. So you're simulating
Mhm.
living and working on Mars, but on Earth. That's an analog. Or it's an environment on Earth, like an extreme environment that mimics perhaps maybe an environment on Mars, like extreme cold conditions. Could you find life in an extreme cold condition? And that could be an analog for possible life on Mars. But we
Mhm.
also looked at analogs for Titan as well. We were interested in, and because Dr. McKay was interested in Titan analogs as well. So
Mhm.
we would scour the Earth to look for these environments that could show us some extreme environments on our planet that could mimic environments on other planets for the possibility of life.
Where were those environments, for example?
So one of the most life-altering expeditions I got to be on was on the way was in Australia.
Mhm.
It was in the Pilbara, and I apologize if it's the Pilbara. I always forget how to pronounce that
Okay.
correctly.
It's fine with
It,
me.
yeah, it's the upper northwest region of Australia near Perth, just north of Perth. And Chris McKay was obviously there as our supervisor, but also Dr. Carol Stoker, and they've known each other since graduate school. So, and this was their first expedition they had been on together. I think this was in 2011. And we were there to look at the Dawn of Life trail that they were establishing in that part of Australia. And it headed us towards a very secure science site called well, where there's 3.5 billion-year-old stromatolites, which is
Wow.
what the current rover on Mars is looking for, Perseverance in Jezero crater. So this was
Mhm.
back in 2011. We have a science team out in Australia in the northwest corner looking at fossilized features from 3.5 billion years ago.
Mhm.
It was
Wow.
pretty amazing. I also got to swim in the Indian Ocean with 17,000-year-old stromatolites that were thriving there right on the shore. And it was just amazing altogether. But we've also been to New Zealand at a geothermal, uh, looking at geothermal vents in the Rotorua area, Taupo Volcanic Zone, I believe it was called.
Mhm.
I've been to the Mojave several times with them, looking at like tardigrades. So we would look at the ponds and the areas in this extreme environment, which is very, very dry and very, very
Mhm.
hot. Areas looking for these very hardy life forms called tardigrades, which are also known as water bears, and they're very, very adorable to look at under a microscope. So they're microscopic, and we would also have some on hand that we had ordered in advance and sent to us so that we could have the teachers there look at them under microscopes. Where else have we been? So Javi, Australia, New Zealand. I know there's somewhere else, but I can't remember where I've been. Oh, Abu Dhabi. Oh my goodness. We spent a month in Abu Dhabi, going all the way all around the state. And Chris McKay, my supervisor, had told me we would probably be sleeping in petrol stations in a sleeping bag or in
Okay.
a tent. But it was nothing like that at all. Matter of fact, we were very well taken care of. And it was really just exciting. And that's where we were looking into the possibility of going into Oman, looking for Titan analogs, but we just stuck in Abu Dhabi because it was we had to be aware of our surroundings and where we're at and what we were doing and being very
Yes.
respectful of the area, being in that part of the world in the Middle East.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah, very cool. But now you're in the UK, right? So you're actually working now for the Royal Astronomical Society, right? And what are you doing in the UK now?
Yeah, so when I came to the UK after teaching in the US, I was a physics lead here in Oxfordshire, where I live, for about a year and a half. And a friend of mine said, "There's a job in London that I think is perfect for you." So she sent me the link to that, and I applied. And 3 hours after my interview, they called me and said, "You have the job if you'd like it." And I was very,
Wow.
very happy for that. And it's an education outreach officer in London.
Hmm.
And I have a colleague, Dr. Sheila Kanani, who is also the education outreach officer, but she moved to the Northwest. So she covers E&O plus diversity, and I cover E&O plus events in London, in
Hmm.
our courtyard, in our building in Piccadilly, which is called Burlington House,
Hmm.
an estate that goes back to the 1800s. So
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So you're trying to get the youngsters in the UK interested in space exploration, right? To have
yeah, my
them start a career in space, right?
exactly. Well, so the Royal Astronomical Society advocates for astronomy, geophysics, and space science. Absolutely. So it not only does it use telescopes on the ground on Earth, Earth observation, or in space to look outward at the universe, it also uses tools and whatnot to look downward at Earth, Earth observation, satellites, etc. And all of those areas around space science that help us do those things. Um, so very much so, I'm part of my job is to work within the United Kingdom. So that covers Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, and Wales. I'm chair of National Astronomy Week in the UK. I do love what I do. I do focus on London and the Southeast because it's hard, but we do make ourselves available for all over the UK to advocate for these, to create more scientists in the United Kingdom, which they're very good at creating, PhD students here, students who I in my experience being here so far,
Hmm.
lots of the university track here in the UK compared to the United States is very much a well-oiled machine in the United Kingdom. And
Hmm.
they put them on this bottlenecked path towards university and towards getting a doctorate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, what an exciting field to be in, right? I mean, space exploration and all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting to kind of always have to know what's going on, the current events and everything. But the Royal Astronomical Society, at its bones, is an academic charity, and we're all about publishing, supporting academics, and publishing scientific research in these fields.
Mm. And also, like recently, or maybe since a couple of years, you've also been active with an organization in China, right? Which is called World Shaper, right? So tell us about that, about your experiences, and yeah.
Yeah, I Dr. Zuber, when I was executive director, called me back in 2018 or 2019 and asked me if I wanted to go to China, and assist this group with Mars education. And I was excited to do so. So I ended up spending a month in China in July 2019. And
Mhm.
there was, I barely ever had any time off. The time I had, they worked me really hard, is what I'm trying to say. And it was
Okay.
exciting and fun, but it was all fun work. It was great. But I definitely, and I really loved being in China. World Shaper is an education organization, and I was with a small group that was just getting started to support human space exploration towards Mars. So it was a very specific group. They needed assistance with creating a summer camp. So I helped them create a Mars summer camp, which I have done several times prior, not only in teaching secondary school, but also in our conferences, Mars Society conferences and events. We've had summer camps, etc. And so and of course, as a teacher, it was nice to be able to kind of focus on these subjects around Mars during the summer. It was a lot of fun. And then they asked me, I did some public talks and some appearances and some press appearances. I also did helped we did some teacher training eventually after I came back. COVID hit, and of course they were still moving forward, and if I could go back, I would in a minute. But of course everything was online, so I also went back and did a couple of workshops, I think 4 hours worth of workshops on introductions to space exploration, human space exploration, and also introductions to Mars, humans to Mars. And I've also worked with one of their curriculum program makers, and helped her create some of this curriculum to help train teachers, because that was really what they wanted to do. They were creating a program to train teachers in Mars education, because there was such a big push in China. As you know, China has launched their space station, and this was before it was launched in 2019. There were lots of pop-up space museums where they would have models of the space station there. And they were doing a lot of outreach about human space exploration. And they're taikonauts, are they called taikonauts in China as well?
Yeah, taikonauts. Yeah.
There you go. So they were doing a lot of outreach, the government, and World Shaper had this department to focus just on Mars education and human space exploration, and that's what I helped them develop.
Okay, so basically, there was a huge push to trying to make space as part of daily life, right? I mean, you could see space in many different areas, right? I mean,
Yeah, like I mentioned, there was pop-up science museums just to advocate for human space exploration. And I should also mention I was there for a month, and another project I helped them work on was to create rover kits so they could have little mini rovers. And they've just, I mean, I didn't help with everything. I just helped with the initial idea and getting them started. And they've built that into this really amazing program with rovers in China. So their summer camps, their teacher training, their rover outreach, and now they just contacted me recently. Now they have these Mars cell labs where they build an environment of like being on a Mars habitat.
really?
Yeah, it's an immersive experience for students in the school. So maybe the classroom is kitted out to look like you're in space or on a spaceship. It's really fantastic. And so that's what they're currently working on. That's what they've been working on over COVID this whole time. So I'm really excited for them, especially now that some of the restrictions under COVID have lifted, that there'll be a lot more of these Mars cell labs in schools.
That summer camp, where was that exactly? In which region of China? Do you remember?
So I mostly spent a lot of my time in Shanghai, but I think the summer camps were in Hangzhou.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Yeah, we might have done some in both Shanghai and Hangzhou, but I think World Shaper's headquarters were in Shanghai. No, my mistake. They were actually in Hangzhou, I believe. They had a department in Hangzhou. But we were in both places. I don't remember which city we did what, but we were moved. In one city, I focused on creation, so producing and creating what we were gonna do, and then we moved to another city, and that's where the children were and the schools were, and then we did summer camp. So we moved between Hangzhou and Shanghai.
Oh wow, yeah. Did you take the high-speed train between Shanghai and Hangzhou?
Yes, we did. It was very fast, so it didn't spend a lot of time on.
Okay, you don't remember it was so fast. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. And I mean, it's really amazing that you had all these experiences, trying to promote space to young people around the world. I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, are there like some things that you would say are like some experiences that were quite similar in the US and in the UK and in China? And are there maybe some things you would say are different? I mean, like for example, where the youngsters everywhere same excited for space? Do you think it's the excitement is growing, in all of these three places?
I would say they're the same everywhere. I think the same excitement I had as a child is what I saw in the kids in China. And it's all cool technology. It was fun, I think, mostly to get them to do things that they might not normally do. I think kids these days might just be stuck behind a device, an electronic device, and just looking at content with no real direction. And what Mars Camp would offer, or space exploration activities or conferences, is a very focused look at human space exploration. And so with Space Camp, we got them very focused on humans to Mars. We had them build their own habitats. We'd give them cardboard and tape and scissors and things,
Oh,
and
wow.
or we'd have them build their own spacesuits, or we'd talk to them about the stars and the planets, and we
Mhm.
looked at the scale and the size, and yeah, so we got them doing things and living in their own little Mars analog in a classroom somewhere in Hangzhou.
Mm.
And I think then that's what I definitely enjoy doing, is having students doing activities with their hands and and using their brain and what they know, or what they can learn. I love curiosity in kids, and I think that's the same all over. Is kids have an innate curiosity for these things, and especially if I think. Of course, I think all science and engineering is exciting because it's all working together to push us forward,
Mm.
and into the unknown, perhaps, but learning new things, and that technology just opens up the world for us more. But no, I think I see that all around. Is it growing? It's tough right now, Carly, I think, because
Yeah.
even more so, I think before COVID, absolutely, it was growing very fast. And then, of course, we were all stopped in our tracks. Um, And COVID made me really realize I wish we had gone faster. I wish we were further along than we had before COVID hit.
You mean
Right now is a trend.
to get the escape velocity, or what do you call that, right? So get out to space.
Well, I guess what I meant was, um, we had people on the International Space Station during COVID, which was probably scary for them, especially if they didn't know launches were going to be coming, and we had to understand, does the virus traveling to space, where are we going to be
Mm.
putting people in danger on the space station. So,
Mm.
but they're pretty good at quarantine and keeping things clean. But I wish we already had humans on Mars. I wish we already had an autonomous colony on Mars, because what if we didn't survive on Earth, this virus? So in some ways, that's why I meant, like, I wish we had, we were meant to go to Mars 8 years after the moon landings back in the 70s. And that's what spurred my supervisor, Dr. Chris McKay, and Dr. Carol Stoker, and Dr. Robert Zubrin, um, to start these every 3 years Mars conferences, the Case for Mars. And that's what got all of this, the ball rolling towards Mars, was the fact that we didn't go to Mars 8 years after the moon landings.
Mhm.
So yeah, in some ways, there's a lot of anxiety or regret that we're not as close to Mars as I thought we would be by now. And then when COVID hit, and there was lots of that feeling of regret.
Mhm.
We're in this transition now, getting out of COVID and going back to whatever the new world is, we're facing,
Mhm.
with everything we've experienced and we've learned going through COVID, and how quickly the world's changed with how we even teach school. So like, for instance, I still teach astronomy in London,
Mhm.
GCSE astronomy secondary school. But I teach it in London at Burlington House at the Royal Astronomical Society.
Mhm.
And before, we would meet every week at Burlington House face to face and go on field trips. And We're still doing a hybrid now, so we still do it online. We do it face to face, but it's difficult. And we haven't done any field trips yet because we're still kind of working all of this stuff out. Um, so I'd say we've hit a few speed bumps on the way to Mars, and I think we'll work through them. I think the world's changed really quickly. It's kind of interesting how we've been forced to change really quickly because of COVID.
Mm.
Um, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You know, COVID was a bad thing, but maybe this force to change the way we do things isn't a bad thing. I think it's in some ways accelerated technology, but in other ways, it's also shown people that we need to really also embrace nature.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say where we're going to come out of all of this. I think it's still kind of up in the air, and what it has done is created a lot of discussion about what do we want the future to look like. It's
Mm.
so exciting right now because all these AI, artificial intelligence, writing bots and chat bots and things are just coming out. I'm thinking, why are you bringing this out now? We have so
Yes.
so
It's like a now or never situation, right? So basically,
it's just they're just throwing more things at the mix of already the technology that we had to have been forced to embrace
mm,
at COVID, which I used Zoom before COVID, but now everyone was using Zoom or Zoom-like technology to get through
mm,
COVID. And then now they're bringing out artificial intelligent bots, and it's just kind of getting overwhelming. And I think sometimes it makes people pause and go, oh, maybe we need to slow down. So that can be a concern about pushing humans to Mars right now. But
although I have to say that, I mean, once as humans we have a Mars colonization colony, we would need to do Zoom calls all the time because we cannot meet in person or not so easily, right? So
well, those Zoom calls would be really difficult to have with the delay.
yeah, we need to figure that out.
So yeah.
Yeah. So what are your plans for the future? Like
Oh, good question. Again, I mean, so as you know, I'm now former executive director of the Mars Society. And
mhm,
so that's left me with a lot of time. And it's been actually really great because, I'm getting older and
you're still pretty young, so
thanks.
I'd say so.
And I kind of get to sit back and see how things are moving along, which there's quite a lot of politics going on around all of this, the world in general, just
Yeah.
economy, politics. There's just a lot AI. It's
Mm,
so it's kind of nice to kind of sit here and observe for a little bit how it's all going. But I think in the back of my mind, I've always wanted, this is going to sound maybe a little weird, but I've always wanted a laser printer. I wanted a huge laser printer. What am I going to do with that laser printer? I don't know, but is it going to forward humans to Mars? I think it will. I don't know
mm,
how I'm going to use it to do that, but I really love lasers and physics and tinkering and making stuff. Um,
mm,
will it? So I don't know how I'm going to do that or use that, but I just really want one and kind of want to go into my shed and build stuff or and look towards the future with that. I don't know
mm,
um, how students could do that in a hybrid way. And I think I think I like working with students face to face and getting them to tinker as well and getting them to
mm,
build and to use their imagination
yeah.
and to think about how to make the world better, the planet that we live on, and to consider how we can also live on other worlds too.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, yes, if the whole world would be like always tinkering around and interested in space and in nature and everything, then yeah, I guess humans to Mars would have already happened, probably, right? So we need to.
I think people do that. I don't know what's important to people these days. If it's being an entrepreneur, starting some new unicorn company. I just know that when we look back on history, I remember all the inventors that are
Mm.
helping us get to, getting further today and living a better life today.
Yeah.
And I don't know if when they lived, did people realize that all the invention that was going on. But yeah, I would hope that we are, social media, TikTok, Instagram.
Hmm.
There's some good stuff in there. There's a whole lot to weed through before you get to it.
Hmm.
And I hope we could focus on the good stuff, where people could really point out the good stuff around curiosity and invention and science,
Yes.
and using social media for good. It's not going to go away. So it's just like, how do we harness all of that to push us forward?
Mm. And also, how do actually, people go from just watching this on like YouTube and TikTok and whatever to actually start doing these things, like building things and tinkering, as you said, right? So, I mean, I'm still waiting for that wave, like when everyone gets off their screens and starts actually doing these kind of things. And yeah, I mean, you were the perfect example, right? That uh, yeah, you try to get young people actually do the things hands on, right? And I think that's important, right?
I
Yeah.
I I do too, and I honestly think that the children, the young people
Hmm.
these days are pretty smart, and they're they've been born with this technology and social
Hmm.
media, and I think even some of them know that sometimes the social media isn't good for them. So I think that even though COVID has, we've had to depend on social media, YouTube and Zoom and all that technology. I think they still want to do hands-on stuff and to learn in an analog way, I guess. Is that like, it
Mars analog, yeah.
makes me think of digital and analog clocks.
Hmm. Yes.
So kind of gone full circle here, Carly, with
Hmm.
the term analog. Um, and actually do things with their hands, and paper and pencil. I love paper and pencil. So kind of, I know I'm advocating laser printers here, but there's nothing wrong with
Hmm.
paper and pencil, and as well, tools and wood as well. So
Yeah.
all of that's good stuff. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe to end up our conversation, do you have some like anecdotes, some experiences about the Chinese culture when you first went to China? Because before you have never been to China, before you've never been to China, right? I mean, of course, in the States, maybe you
Yeah.
have some Chinatowns or so, but you have not had much
So
contact with Chinese culture before.
yeah, that was my first time. I did spend a month there, but I think most of the time I was in an office building or in a classroom.
Okay. But
But
maybe this is Chinese culture, right? An office
work,
building and
it,
a
it
classroom,
definitely
right?
felt like a lot of work. It was work. I mean, so as an American who lives in the UK, there's a difference between life and work in both
Hmm.
countries. So in America, I grew up, working 40 plus hours a week,
Hmm.
and I worked since I was 14.
Hmm.
And I've always worked. And but of course, even as Mars Society executive director, I worked the weekends every weekend. It's been so
Hmm.
weird not being the executive director, because now I have my weekends, which is so nice.
Okay.
And living in the UK and working in the UK, there's a very strong push towards life work balance,
Hmm.
and that you really shouldn't work 40 hours. You should work more like 37 and a half a week. You
Hmm.
should really leave on time and enjoy the rest of your day at
Hmm.
home with your family. And
Yeah.
you should enjoy your weekends. And you should make sure that when you have your time off, your annual leave, you go do something outside of work and home, and
Hmm.
enjoy nature and the world around you. Um, in China, it was America on steroids a little bit.
Hmm.
But we worked hard and we played hard. I got to see some amazing things as well. They're amazing human beings in China.
Hmm.
That, but managing 2 billion people must just be so difficult. But they had some really, incredible solutions for that. Like, for instance, using WeChat, which I wasn't used to. That was the only way I would be able to buy things, if I had a
Mm,
WeChat account with a card on it,
mm,
because and this was before COVID, so everything was contactless anyway.
mhm,
When we went into a little shop, like in America, it would be like a 7-Eleven shop,
yeah.
which is like a little petrol station shop or sundry shop where you can get snacks and drinks and things.
Mhm,
That was all by your mobile phone. And then QR
mm,
codes were everywhere. You always used a QR code. Like I remember when we parked in a parking lot, we had to scan a QR code to pay
mm,
the parking ticket. Um, and it was a lot of the futuristic and fast. Like we could get our lunch delivered, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people were having their lunch delivered at the same time when we
mm,
were working during an office day, and it was just amazing that you could order something on WeChat and it'd be there, 10 minutes later or something.
mm,
Um, but also, one of my favorite things was going into like an old cafeteria style diner in China that was run
mhm,
by, which looked like older women, like dinner ladies wearing aprons, and
mhm.
you would grab your tray and you would join the queue and push your tray along the queue, and these women had made the most amazing food that was behind
Yeah.
this plexiglass, and they would just ladle it out and dish you what you wanted, and you could say what point to what you wanted, and the food was incredible. So um
Mhm,
I I've never tasted food so delicious in my life as I did in China, and just thinking about it now, I miss it so much. But I don't know enough about China culture. That was it.
mhm,
And I don't know enough about China politics. But what I did see was the push for human space exploration to support their space program, was obviously by the government, and they wanted everyone to get on board.
okay.
Um, it is exciting and inspiring. And I think it's interesting the difficulty America has had with being with independence and being an individual. And we've not been able to get really a robust space program to get humans to Mars, or to even get um, any new station parts of the station to go up to the international station. That
Mhm,
that that the international space station is constantly having to be maintained by astronauts. It's old, and it can't last for very much longer. So
mhm,
and also we're in microgravity. We haven't moved beyond low Earth orbit. We have these ideas of going to the moon with the Artemis program, but really, honestly, with the way space programs go in the United States, which they change every presidential change, it can be
mhm.
every 4 years or every 8 years.
Yeah.
Every new president wants to put their stamp on it. So who
Mhm,
knows what will happen with the Artemis program, if it'll carry on with the next president.
mhm. Yeah.
And that's the difficulty, is you don't have everyone working together towards the same goal in America as it looked like in China.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. 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 I mean, perhaps we can learn from each other, and whatever works should
Yeah,
be, yeah. l- I mean, others should learn from them, from that basically. So,
absolutely. They're doing lots of things right. And like I've mentioned before, managing 2 billion people is an incredible feat. And cannot be easy at all. And as an American, I don't think we're doing a great job, with the way we live in America. Things are falling apart. People aren't really working together. We seem to be fighting a lot more in-house, and not really working together in America. And I think something needs to change in America, and that we need to look outside ourselves. We are very insular. Um, Living in England has really opened up my eyes, and I've always loved to travel, so I've always had an idea of that other people live differently than
mhm.
I did growing
Yeah.
up. But moving to the UK, and being an observer of America has really showed me that uh, we really, in America, we really don't look outside and observe how others live. We kind of just stay within our own thoughts and minds and kind of stay stuck there in a way. And
Mhm,
I wish we wouldn't. I wish we would realize that um, we could learn a lot from other cultures.
mhm.
I really wish we could. And I wish we would look at China, at how they're doing. Some of the things that they are doing are really exciting and good.
Yeah, I mean, we're like all on the same Earth starship, right? So we should be looking what every member is doing, and then trying to work together, right? Basically.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
was actually it's interesting. There was something that I on social media that I took today, which was
Mhm.
an image of Darwin, um and a quote from Darwin that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change, that lives within the means available, and works cooperatively against common threats,
Mhm.
or perhaps cooperatively against goals that push you forward. Um, and I think I'm hoping that that's what all human beings on this planet realize at some point. And definitely collaboration is a really good thing, I think. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other.
Well, thank you, Lucinda. I think with this quote of Mr. Darwin, we'll leave it for today. Thanks a lot for being on this conversation,
Thanks
and
for having me, Carly.
I hope you can inspire many more youngsters around the globe, and perhaps maybe also one day on other planets. We'll see.
Okay, me too. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, thank you,
Bye.
Lucinda, and see you. Bye.